The older I become, the more I believe that silence is never truly empty. At 72 years old, I had lived long enough to know the difference between peaceful silence and dangerous silence. Peaceful silence lets a man rest. Dangerous silence waits patiently for the moment it can destroy everything he has spent a lifetime building. That Monday morning, I was sitting alone in the breakfast room of my Manhattan penthouse, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across the polished walnut floor. Outside, New York City was already alive. Yellow taxis flowed through the streets below like rivers of gold, and people hurried toward offices that looked like tiny boxes from where I sat. For most people, mornings brought hope. For me, that morning brought the beginning of the end. My name is Robert Thornwell. I am 72 years old, a grandfather of 3, and the founder of Thornwell Industries, one of the largest construction and real estate companies in the country. People often assume that wealth protects you from heartbreak. They're wrong. Money can build skyscrapers. It cannot build trust. I wrapped my hands around a cup of black coffee and stared at the city I had helped shape. Over the last 45 years, my company had designed office towers, luxury hotels, hospitals, and neighborhoods across America. Every building carried my signature. Every success carried my family's name. Yet none of those accomplishments prepared me for what waited only a few feet away on my dining table. My wife, Sophia, entered the room wearing a cream-colored business suit that fit her perfectly. Even at 68, she carried herself with effortless elegance. She smiled warmly. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking for you." She leaned down and kissed my cheek. For 50 years, that kiss had meant home. Now, when I think back, I wonder if it had already become nothing more than habit. "You're up early," I replied. "I have a flight." "California again?" She nodded. "The Charity Foundation is opening another children's center. I'll probably be gone 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She had been traveling more and more over the past few years. Fundraisers. Charity events. Board meetings. Art exhibitions. I never questioned her. Why would I? After half a century of marriage, suspicion feels almost insulting. She poured herself coffee before sitting across from me. "You work too much," she laughed. "When are you finally going to retire?" "I tried retirement once. And I was bored after 9 days." She laughed again. It sounded exactly like the woman I had fallen in love with when I was 22 years old. That laugh had survived decades. Children. Success. Loss. The funeral of my parents. The birth of our grandchildren. The difficult years when my company nearly collapsed. Sophia had stood beside me through everything. Or so I believed. She glanced toward her watch. I should finish packing. She stood, squeezed my shoulder affectionately, and disappeared upstairs. I watched her go. Nothing about that moment seemed unusual. Nothing warned me that my life was quietly splitting into 2 separate chapters. One before that morning. One after. About 20 minutes later, my assistant delivered several business files to the penthouse. Most were contracts requiring my signature. One envelope had accidentally been mixed into the stack. It was thick. Official. Addressed to a holding company I didn't recognize. Normally I would have returned it unopened. Instead, something made me pause. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps instinct. Perhaps God. I opened it. Inside was an insurance policy. Property location. Carmel by the Sea, California. Estimated property value. $6,180,000. Property name. Sea Haven Estate. I frowned. I had never heard of Sea Haven Estate. The insured owner wasn't Sophia. It wasn't me. It wasn't Thornwell Industries. Instead, ownership belonged to a company called Blue Crest Holdings LLC. At first, I assumed someone had made a filing error. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The premium payments originated from the Thornwell Family Preservation Trust. My trust. The trust my grandfather established almost 80 years ago. The trust designed to protect our family's future. I read the page again. Then again. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a new investment. Perhaps Edward, my attorney, had purchased another commercial property. Still, something felt wrong. I stood and walked slowly toward my home office. Over the years, I had developed a habit. Whenever numbers stopped making sense, I checked them myself. Success had taught me one important lesson. Never ignore small irregularities. They usually hide enormous truths. I logged into the family trust account. The password remained the same one I had used for years. Within seconds the financial dashboard appeared. Everything looked normal. Until I searched for Blue Crest Holdings. There it was. Monthly transfers. $80,000. $120,000. $95,000. Again. 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 For nearly 4 years. I leaned back in my chair. No. That single word escaped before I realized I had spoken aloud. For years. How had I missed this? I opened another report. Construction expenses. Landscape architecture. Interior design. Luxury furnishings. Private security. Every invoice linked back to the California property. Over $5 million. I rubbed my temples. Surely Edward would have mentioned an investment this large. Wouldn't he? The office suddenly felt smaller. The walls closer. My heart beat louder. At that exact moment Sophia entered the room carrying her designer luggage. I'm heading out. I quickly minimized the financial reports. She smiled naturally. I'll miss you. She walked over and embraced me. For a brief second, I almost told her. Almost asked about Blue Crest Holdings. Instead, I hugged her back. Perhaps I was afraid of the answer. She kissed my forehead. Don't forget your cardiology appointment next Thursday. I won't. And promise me you'll actually eat proper meals while I'm gone. I promise. She smiled one last time before leaving. A few moments later I heard the elevator doors close. Then silence. Real silence. The dangerous kind. I waited another 15 minutes before walking toward the large living room windows. From the 36th floor, I watched a black SUV pull away from the building. Sophia sat comfortably in the back seat. She never looked up. I stood there until the vehicle disappeared into morning traffic. Something inside me whispered that I shouldn't let this go. For the first time in decades. I listened. I walked upstairs to Sophia's private study. She rarely locked it. She trusted me completely. Or perhaps she believed I would never look. The room smelled faintly of lavender perfume. Everything appeared perfectly organized. Family photographs lined the shelves. Pictures of our grandchildren. Award ceremonies. Anniversary dinners. Vacations in Italy. A lifetime captured inside polished silver frames. Then I noticed another laptop tucked inside a leather cabinet. It wasn't her everyday computer. I had never seen it before. Curiosity 1. I opened it. The screen requested a password. Without thinking, I typed our wedding anniversary. The computer unlocked instantly. My heart skipped. Cloud synchronization began updating automatically. Dozens. Then hundreds. Of photographs appeared. I stared without blinking. The first image showed Sophia standing barefoot on a white sand beach. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her, with his arm comfortably around her shoulders, was Daniel Brooks, my former chauffeur. For 12 years Daniel had driven me to meetings, airports, hospitals, and family vacations. I had attended his daughter's high school graduation. I had helped him pay medical bills after his wife passed away. He had cried in my office and thanked me for treating him like family. Now, he was smiling beside my wife as though they had built another life together. I clicked another photograph. And another. Private dinners. Luxury hotels. Wine tastings. Sunsets. Boat rides. Christmas decorations. Matching sweaters. My breathing became shallow. This wasn't an affair. This was a second marriage hidden inside my own. Then I saw a folder. Its title read, Our Forever Home. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were architectural renderings of Sea Haven Estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Ocean views. Private gardens. A library. A wine cellar. Family photographs already hanging on the digital walls. One caption stopped me cold. Finally, a home where no one can tell us how to live. My vision blurred. I reached for the edge of the desk to steady myself. The room spun. For 50 years. I believed I had been building a future for my wife. Instead, I had unknowingly financed her escape from me. And I had absolutely no idea how much worse the truth was about to become. I don't remember how long I sat in that chair. The laptop remained open in front of me, its glowing screen displaying smiling faces that no longer belonged to my life. My hands rested on the desk, motionless, while my mind desperately searched for a reasonable explanation. There wasn't one. The woman I had loved for half a century had built another life while I was still living inside the first one. I closed the laptop gently. Not because I wanted to forget what I had seen, but because I understood something my father taught me many years ago. When emotion enters the room, good judgment leaves through the window. I wasn't going to confront Sophia. Not yet. If I wanted the truth, I needed facts, not anger. I picked up my phone and called the only man I trusted with my family's business. Edward Mason answered on the second ring. Robert? I need to see you. His voice immediately became serious. Office? No. My Vermont estate. There was a brief silence. I'll leave within the hour. By sunset I was sitting in the library of the Thornwell estate, a stone mansion that had overlooked the Green Mountains for nearly a century. Every room carried memories. My father reading newspapers beside the fireplace. My mother playing the piano on rainy evenings. My grandchildren racing through the gardens every summer. It was the only place where I could still hear my own thoughts. Edward arrived just after 6 carrying 2 leather briefcases. He had been my attorney for 43 years. He wasn't simply a lawyer. He was family. He looked at me carefully before speaking. You've lost weight. I've lost something far more valuable. I handed him the laptop. Look. He spent nearly 20 minutes examining the photographs and financial records. The deeper he searched, the quieter he became. Finally he removed his glasses. This is worse than I imagined. So I'm not imagining it. No. He folded his hands together. Someone has been stealing from your family trust. How much? I won't know until we perform a complete forensic audit. But judging by these transfers. He paused. It could exceed $6 million. I leaned back slowly. 6 million. Not in one dramatic theft. Thousands of careful cuts over several years. Like someone draining a lake one bucket at a time. Edward looked directly into my eyes. Robert, do you want revenge? I thought carefully before answering. No. I want accountability. There is a difference. He nodded. Good. Because revenge clouds judgment. Accountability wins in court. For the next 3 days, accountants worked around the clock. Every document was examined. Every transfer traced. Every signature verified. By Thursday afternoon, Edward returned carrying a thick binder. He placed it on the desk. "I've finished." I opened the first page. The numbers made my stomach tighten. Blue Crest Holdings had received money from 18 different shell companies. Those shell companies had been paid through fake consulting agreements. Those consulting agreements originated inside Thornwell Industries. Someone inside my own company had approved them. Edward pointed toward a name. "Look here. Chief Financial Authorization. Martin Hayes. Martin. My longtime Chief Financial Officer. 31 years. He had attended my daughter's wedding. Spent Christmas dinners with my family. Held my first grandson the day he was born. He had betrayed me too." I closed my eyes. "You trusted very carefully chosen people," Edward said quietly. "They abused that trust." I looked out the library window toward the lake. When I started this company, we worked from a rented warehouse. We couldn't afford office furniture. My employees became my family. Edward remained silent. Sometimes silence is the greatest kindness. That evening curiosity pushed me toward another folder recovered from Sophia's cloud storage. Unlike the photographs, this folder contained videos. The first one lasted only 40 seconds. Daniel stood outside the California house recording the ocean. Then Sophia stepped into view laughing. She wrapped both arms around him. "This is finally ours." Daniel smiled. "No. It's yours. You earned it." Sophia laughed softly. "We earned it." My thumb froze over the screen. There wasn't a trace of guilt. Not even a hint. Only happiness. I started another recording. This one showed them decorating the library inside Sea Haven Estate. Daniel looked around proudly. "Hard to believe Robert paid for all this." Sophia answered with a smile that no longer felt familiar. "He never notices the money. He's too busy building more." The video ended. I stared at the black screen. That single sentence hurt more than the affair itself. She hadn't only betrayed my marriage. She had underestimated my intelligence. The next morning I walked alone through the estate gardens. The autumn air smelled of pine and damp earth. For the first time in years, I noticed how peaceful the world remained despite human cruelty. Birds still sang. Leaves still fell. The sun still rose. Life refused to stop simply because my heart had broken. My granddaughter Emma called while I was feeding the koi pond. "Grandpa." Her cheerful voice instantly softened something inside me. "Are you coming to my piano recital next month?" "I wouldn't miss it." "You promise?" "I promise." After we hung up, I realized exactly what I was protecting. Not my pride. Not my wealth. My family's future. If $6 million disappeared today, what would disappear tomorrow? Emma's education. My grandson's business fund. The charitable foundation my late parents created. No. This wasn't only about me anymore. Edward entered the garden carrying another folder. "We found something else." "What now?" "The California property isn't legally owned by Blue Crest." "It isn't?" He shook his head. "It's held through 4 separate companies spread across different states." "Why?" "To hide the real ownership." "Can you prove it?" He smiled faintly. "Eventually." "How long?" "Fraud leaves footprints. The question isn't whether we'll find them. It's whether they'll realize we've started looking. That afternoon my phone vibrated. Sophia. For several seconds I simply watched her name appear on the screen. Then I answered. Hello. Robert. She sounded relaxed. The fundraiser went wonderfully. I'm glad. I bought you something. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Behind her voice I heard ocean waves. Someone laughed. A man's voice. Daniel. She quickly moved farther away. What have you been doing? Thinking. She chuckled. That sounds dangerous. For some people, I replied. She laughed again. I'll call you tomorrow. I love you. There was a pause. Just long enough to notice. I love you too. The call ended. Those 4 words had carried me through 50 years. Now they sounded rehearsed. Late that night Edward knocked gently on the library door. I didn't want to wait until morning. He handed me a single sheet of paper. What is it? A passenger manifest. Sophia hadn't traveled alone. Daniel had boarded the same private flight. Using false business credentials. Sitting only 3 rows behind her. Not by accident. By design. Every trip. Every conference. Every charity gala. For nearly 4 years. I placed the document on the desk. Oddly enough. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. There is a moment when heartbreak changes shape. It stops asking, why did this happen? And begins asking. What happens next? I finally had my answer. Tomorrow morning Edward would begin filing emergency motions to protect the family trust. Quietly. Legally. Without warning. Sophia believed she was living inside the final chapter of our marriage. She had no idea. She was only halfway through the story. Edward arrived at my Vermont estate before sunrise. A thin layer of mist floated across the lake, and the old stone house felt quieter than it ever had before. I watched from the library window as his black sedan rolled slowly up the gravel driveway. For 43 years, Edward Mason had solved problems most people never knew existed. Today, he carried the future of my family in 2 leather briefcases. He entered without ceremony. I've already started, he said. I hoped you would. He placed several folders across the mahogany desk. I contacted the trustees before dawn. No one outside this room knows why. I nodded. The family trust has been placed under temporary protective review. No additional transfers can be approved without signatures from all 3 trustees. What about the shell companies? We're tracing them. He slid another document toward me. I think you'll want to see this first. It was a timeline. Every suspicious payment over the past 4 years had been organized by date. As I followed the entries, something unexpected caught my attention. The money hadn't disappeared randomly. Each transfer matched one of Sophia's charity trips. Seattle. Napa Valley. San Diego. Carmel. Palm Springs. Every journey she claimed was for fundraising coincided with another payment to Blue Crest Holdings. The pattern was too precise to ignore. This wasn't impulsive, I said quietly. Edward shook his head. No. This was planned. I leaned back in my chair. They prepared this for years. Later that afternoon, my head of private security arrived. His name was Michael Reeves, a retired federal investigator who had worked for my family for nearly 20 years. Unlike most people, Michael spoke only when he had something worth saying. I've looked into Daniel Brooks. What did you find? He resigned from your company 18 months ago. I remember. He said he wanted to spend more time with family. Michael opened a folder. That wasn't true. Inside were public records showing Daniel had quietly become the director of 2 consulting companies. Neither company had employees. Neither company had clients. Yet both had received hundreds of thousands of dollars through Blue Crest Holdings. "He wasn't just your former driver," Michael said. "He became part of the financial structure." I stared at Daniel's photograph. For years he had waited outside meetings, opened car doors, and asked about my grandchildren. Every conversation had been built on a lie. That evening, I walked alone through the gardens behind the estate. The roses were beginning to fade with the season. My late wife, before Sophia? No. I stopped myself. That thought reminded me of something important. Sophia wasn't replacing anyone. She had been my only wife. For 50 years. That history couldn't simply disappear. It had existed. So had the love. The betrayal didn't erase every good memory. It only changed how I understood them. I sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the lake. My father used to bring me here whenever business became difficult. He always said, "Character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when someone gives you every reason to become someone you're not." Those words stayed with me. I refused to become bitter. But I also refused to become blind again. The following morning Edward called before breakfast. "We've hit something significant." "I'm listening." "One of the shell companies purchased artwork." "Artwork?" "Very expensive artwork." He emailed photographs. Large oil paintings. Rare sculptures. Vintage watches. Jewelry. None of it appeared on company inventories. "So where is it?" I asked. Edward answered quietly. "Sea Haven Estate." I closed my eyes. The California house wasn't simply furnished. It had become a museum built with stolen money. Around noon my phone rang. "Sophia." This time I answered immediately. "Robert." She sounded cheerful. "You'll never guess where I am." "I probably won't." She laughed. "I finally found that little cafe we visited years ago." For a brief moment I almost believed her. Then I remembered. We had never visited California together. She had accidentally borrowed a memory from another life. "That sounds wonderful," I replied evenly. "It is. You'd love it." "I'm sure I would." She spoke for another few minutes about sunshine, fresh flowers, and ocean air. Every sentence felt rehearsed. When the call ended, I placed the phone face down. Edward looked at me from across the room. She slipped. "I know. People maintaining 2 lives eventually confuse them." 3 days later Michael returned. "I have surveillance photographs." He spread several images across the desk. Sophia and Daniel walking through local markets. Meeting with contractors. Signing paperwork. Laughing over coffee. Nothing dramatic. Nothing illegal by itself. Yet together the photographs told a complete story. They no longer behaved like people hiding. They behaved like people who believed they had escaped. Michael placed one final photograph in front of me. Sophia and Daniel stood on the balcony of Sea Haven Estate watching the sunset. Daniel held 2 champagne glasses. Behind them hung a wooden sign. "Welcome home." I looked at the words for a long time. Home. The one thing I had spent my life trying to build. Edward broke the silence. "The court hearing is scheduled for Monday." "So soon?" "The judge approved expedited review because trust assets are involved." "What happens then?" "If everything proceeds as expected." He smiled slightly. "Every account connected to Blue Crest Holdings will be frozen immediately." "And Sea Haven?" "The property cannot legally be sold, refinanced, or transferred." They'll still be living there. For a little while. But eventually they'll receive notice. I nodded slowly. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. No revenge. Just the law. Edward smiled. Exactly. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the pain had disappeared. It hadn't. But uncertainty had. For the first time since opening Sophia's laptop, I knew what came next. The truth was no longer hiding. It was moving. Quietly. Patiently. One legal document at a time. Far away in California, Sophia and Daniel were probably planning another dinner on the terrace, another walk along the beach, another toast to the future they believed belonged to them. They had no idea that, in less than 48 hours, every financial foundation beneath Sea Haven Estate would begin to crack. Empires are rarely destroyed by explosions. More often, they fall because one carefully placed stone is removed from the base. And on Monday morning, the first stone would be pulled away. Monday mornings had always been my favorite. For more than 40 years, they represented new beginnings, fresh opportunities, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that would outlast me. But this Monday was different. I woke before sunrise in the Vermont estate. The old grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6 slow chimes, each one echoing through the silent house. I stood by the library window with a cup of black coffee, watching a blanket of fog drift across the lake. Somewhere, nearly 3,000 miles away, Sophia was waking up beside the man she had chosen over me. She still believed she had won. She had no idea that by noon, the life she had carefully constructed would begin to collapse, not through shouting, not through revenge, but through the quiet force of the truth. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Edward entered carrying a single folder. "It's done," he said. I looked into his eyes before asking the question I already knew the answer to. "The court approved everything?" He nodded. "Every account connected to Blue Crest Holdings has been frozen. The trust assets are protected, and the California property has been placed under legal review until ownership is resolved." I let out a slow breath. Months earlier, I might have celebrated. Instead, I felt only sadness. No victory could erase 50 years of memories. Edward sat across from me. "Robert, there will be phone calls today." "I know. They'll accuse you of being cruel." "I know. They'll say you're ruining their lives." I looked toward the family portraits lining the library wall. "My life was already ruined," I answered quietly. "I'm simply refusing to let them ruin my family's future too." At exactly 10:17 a.m., my phone rang. Sophia. I watched her name appear on the screen for several seconds before answering. "Robert." Her voice was shaking. "Our bank card stopped working." I remained silent. "There has to be some mistake." "I don't think so. We're locked out of one of the investment accounts." Another pause. Then came panic. "The property manager just called. They're saying ownership documents are under legal review." I closed my eyes. The moment had arrived. "I've spoken with my attorneys," I said calmly. Silence. Then, for the first time in 50 years, I heard genuine fear in Sophia's voice. "You know." It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. "I know enough." Her breathing became uneven. "It's not what you think." I looked out across the lake. "I hope that's true. Because if it wasn't, there would be very little left to save." Less than an hour later, another call came. This time it was Daniel. I almost didn't answer. "Mr. Thornwell." His confident voice was gone. "I'd like to explain." "You have 5 minutes." He inhaled deeply. "I never wanted to hurt you." The sentence lingered in the air. I almost laughed. "You accepted my kindness. You accepted my trust. You accepted my money. And now you tell me you never wanted to hurt me. I loved her. The words landed heavily. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Love. Such a beautiful word. So often used to justify ugly choices. If you truly loved someone, I said quietly, you wouldn't build your happiness on another person's honesty. He said nothing. Neither did I. Eventually, the line went dead. That afternoon, I walked through the gardens with my oldest grandson, Ethan. He was 16 now, old enough to notice that something was wrong, but young enough not to know every detail. Grandpa, he asked carefully, are you okay? Children have a remarkable ability to ask the questions adults avoid. I smiled gently. I'm healing. He looked puzzled. You don't look sick. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Not every wound can be seen. He nodded thoughtfully. For several minutes, we walked without speaking. Finally he asked. Will everything be okay? I looked toward the mountains stretching across the horizon. Eventually. That answer was honest. Healing isn't quick. Sometimes it isn't even graceful. But it is possible. Back inside the library, Edward was waiting with another envelope. We received documents from California. I opened them slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. Not from Sophia. From Daniel. Apparently he had written it weeks before everything unraveled. It had never been mailed. Edward found it during the legal discovery process. The first sentence caught my attention immediately. Sometimes I wonder whether we're building our future on borrowed happiness. I continued reading. Daniel admitted that he had often questioned whether what they were doing was right. He wrote about feeling guilty every time he remembered the years I had helped him through difficult moments. He confessed that he wanted to leave several times. But he never did. I finished the letter and folded it carefully. Edward watched me. What do you think? I think regret arrives much later than temptation. That evening, another surprise arrived. A delivery driver handed me a small wooden box. Inside was my old pocket watch. The one my father had given me on my 30th birthday. I had searched for it for months. I assumed I had simply misplaced it. Beneath the watch rested a note written in Sophia's familiar handwriting. You deserve to have this back. I'm sorry. Nothing more. No excuses. No demands. No attempts to defend herself. Just 7 simple words. I held the watch in my hands for a long time. My father used to wind it every night before bed. He always said, time doesn't heal people. The choices they make during that time do. For the first time since this nightmare began, I cried. Not because I wanted Sophia back. Not because I regretted protecting my family. I cried because grief doesn't disappear the moment justice begins. Sometimes the heart continues mourning long after the mind has accepted reality. As darkness settled over the estate, I stood alone on the porch. The stars reflected across the still lake like tiny pieces of broken glass. Behind me stood a house built by generations of my family. Ahead of me waited a future I never expected to face alone. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The betrayal had changed me. Not into a harder man. Into a wiser one. I finally understood that the strongest foundation isn't built from wealth, influence, or power. It's built from integrity. Money can disappear. Buildings can crumble. Relationships can break. But a person's character remains long after everything else is gone. Far away in California, Sophia and Daniel were beginning to understand that truth for themselves. And for the first time in many months, I no longer wondered whether I would survive this chapter of my life. I knew I would. Because they had taken my trust. They had taken my peace. They had even taken years I could never get back. But they had failed to take the one thing that mattered most. My name. My values. And the legacy I would leave for my grandchildren. As I closed the front door behind me, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the first chapter of the life I would finally live for myself. Redheart.